2, 3, go.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So today we're here to discuss the idea that video games promote violence and encourage criminal behavior. We know that video games have been very popular lately, and since the start of the gaming culture back in the 1900s, there was this controversy that violent video games can promote violent behaviors in children and even in young adults. So there are some people that stand behind the side that yes, they do create some violent behaviors. There are some people that say there has not been any causality or any actual connection between the both, between violent behavior and video games. But today we're here just to discuss our point of view from your area of expertise. What do you consider? Do video games create this negative behavior or do they not? So I think firstly, it would be very valuable for us to talk about what do we consider violence and what would a child consider violence, what would an adult consider violence, which content in the video games is actually negative. And then I think it would be also very good if we kind of come to some proposals for implementing maybe stricter age ratings or some government policies like taxes or examples like that to restrict this violent content in case you consider these are negatives for a child's or a young adult's development. So throughout the conversation of today, we'll hear very diverse viewpoints, and I would like for us to start by introducing yourselves, maybe here on my left. What is your name, your area of expertise, or your background, and what some of your initial stance? Are you in favor or are you against?
Okay, well, good morning everyone. My name is Eduardo. I'm a college student, and one of my main hobbies is playing video games. My stand or posture on this topic is kind of complicated, as this conversation usually goes in circles for me. Whenever something bad happens in the world, people look the easiest thing to blame, and most of the time that is video games. But I think that for a person who consumes this media, there is a massive difference between real world and fiction. I mean, while they're not perfect, they're not the root for the problem of violence.
Well, my name is Fernanda Miguel Rodriguez. I am a video game developer, and in regards to the idea that video games are promoting violence, I'd say that me, as well as other video game developers out there, are basically in the direct line of fire of this idea, because obviously we're the ones creating these games, and we often get like backlash and bombarded with complaints about how could we possibly add these elements into a game. We're often demonized and painted as these horrible, messed up people for adding violence and all that messed up stuff into these games. When in reality, it's never our intention to promote this kind of violence. It shouldn't be promoted. I agree that it shouldn't be promoted, but it was never our intention in the first place. So essentially, my stance on it is that I completely disagree. It never promotes violence.
My name is Isabella Martinez, and I'm a psychologist. And from my point of view, this debate is not new. And while there are some studies that show that video games make short-term aggressive thoughts, there's no strong evidence that says that video games make children more aggressive. From my point of view, psychologists focus more on the maturity of the children and how they process information. And while it might be something, how can I say it, stimulated for their brains, it's not a big cause of violent young adults.
Well, my name is Emilio Sandejas. I'm a doctor, specifically a neurologist. and I think that video games have not a bad effect on young adults or teenagers. In fact, I think there are benefits for the brain health and has a lot of good effects on them. Yeah.
So, good morning. I am Inez Novalis and I'm here as a parent. So, I am against the violence in video games, especially because at the end of the day, it's the parent's main responsibility. And also, it does not only affect the child that's playing the video game, it can also affect the others around it that don't actually play the game, but can hear the violence or the screaming.
Hello, good morning all. My name's Ben, and I'm a teacher. So for me personally, I think it's more about how the kids are when they come into the classroom, as opposed to how they are outside of it. So I'm more influenced by their behavioural aspects when they come into the classroom. My stance at the moment is that I don't think that video games promote violence, just from the stuff that I've seen personally.
Thank you very much. So now the discussion will be open. I would like to start by asking you a question about defining this violent content, because there are so many types of different video games. We have shooters, we have other types of violent video games. But what do you think is like the line? How do children and adults perceive this content differently? And what content is negative, or would you consider negative to children or young adults' behavior? And what content would be fine?
Well, essentially from like a developer's viewpoint, I'd say it is very important for us that we keep in mind our target audience. So whenever we create games that's more directed to a younger audience, say for a kid of 7 years old, 13 years old, if we do ever try to add violence into our video games, it's always done in a way that is deemed as cartoony. Think of the type of violence you see in Tom and Jerry and those kinds of cartoons. In comparison to more violent, to more mature games for older audiences, like say 16 years old up to like 18 or older, and essentially their point of view of violence is like very different. So as I mentioned, towards kids, it is more seen as less like harmless because there's never really that much blood and gore ever like shown on screen for the sake of the child, in comparison to like an adult, where that would be the more proper age where they can be able to see this type of more gruesome content and blood. So essentially, with how both of them view violence, it is very different. I can say it ranges from like a more childish violence, I'd say, to more brutal and bloody violence. Say it's like a different range from say maybe Sonic the Hedgehog type violence to Doom level violence. That's where I'm at. That's where I believe the difference, like in range of how they view violence is at.
I'd like to come in as a teacher's perspective again and talk about the difference, I think, between aggression and violence, because I think in a classroom we're going to see more aggression, not necessarily is that going to turn into violence. So I think I'm not going to say that video games don't have a bad effect on children in the classroom, because we see more different sides of it, such as tiredness, irritability, lack of work ethic. So if they've been playing these games, they don't care about what they're doing in class anymore, stuff like that. So I want to talk about, yes, there might be some aggression from these video games, but does it actually result in violence? I don't think so. That's just what I see personally.
And if I can add to that, I agree on the aggression part of the personality, because, for example, as a parent, when I hear my child screaming at the video game because he gets frustrated or insulting the video game, then if he's angry that he lost, then he might be in a bad mood and might be irritated because of that, and I see that I consider violence, well, I consider myself more experienced in the sense that, for example, we see movies with a bit more blood, and we consider that violence. But I've also seen video games where the point is blank out to kill people. For example, Call of Duty Warzone, the point is to kill people until you reach your goal. Now I understand that there are different levels of violence, that I completely understand, but then again, the children are always going to argue that it's okay because the game is super popular and children their age are also playing it, whereas it's super violent. But as a parent, you have to consider what the actual goal of the game is. If the goal is just simply to kill people, at that point it has become violent.
Regarding your point, I understand your perspective. I mean, if I walk into my living room as a parent that doesn't consume this media, I would think that they're playing a murder simulator with these scenes where there are car crashing, blood being spilled, or guns being used. But the error comes from assuming that the children or the kids that are playing these things have this shared feeling. From my personal experience, I can tell you that we're more focused on the mechanics of the game and the strategy that we need to use to win the competition. For example, if I'm playing a first-person shooter, I'm more thinking about the angles I have to cover, the movements I have to make, or the strategy in overall I have to use. It is similar to a sport. It's competitive. For example, fencing. I don't see people complaining about fencing that it's literally a sport about stabbing each other. We understand that it's a competition and it's not real. I think that the main difference here is that violence is the feedback that games give in order to let you know if you're making the main objective or not. When we talk about children, I think it is more complicated because, well, most of the teenagers are able to differentiate between the real fiction world, but kids might see these things as cool things or cool effects, and they may want to imitate it. Overall, I think that adults see risk, teenagers see challenges, and kids see chaos. The error comes from when adults assume that the whole population has the same vision on it, and they kind of enjoying this murder simulator.
I understand your point of view, but sometimes, as you say, it depends on the age of the child, and that some of them may understand strategy and they get frustrated because what they planned did not work out. But I still see that they are satisfied when their strategy works out, and therefore when the point of the strategy was to kill multiple people, in the game. So that's also the end point at the end of the day. The child, no matter the age, he will be exposed to this violence. For example, if they see their other sibling insulting the TV or seeing these images, that child is not physically playing it, but he's exposed to it, he can see. And so if he doesn't understand the game, or he doesn't know the strategy and all those elements, then he can perceive it in a different way and maybe in the wrong manner and think that it's okay to adopt this aggressive behavior.
Well, I think that in that case, there are age ratings for a reason. And it's responsibility of the parents to know what their kids are playing, you know. It's not the same 10-year-old playing Call of Duty than 18-year-old playing it, because he have the maturity, his brain developed enough to know that that's not real and to sustain that. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, because children tend to understand information less logically and more emotionally than young adults or adults that are more rational and they fully understand what they are seeing. While kids, they don't really understand what's happening on the game. They just get stimulated by all the colors, all the sounds, and well, that does not make children aggressive. It could be like triggered if parents, they don't pay attention to their children and they don't teach them what is correct and what is wrong.
I
completely agree on that. That's why I personally find that age ratings, at the end of the day, they're quite ineffective because it's all down to the parent to supervise, to see how long he's been playing the game, etc. But the thing is, I mean, as parent to parent, you should be able to trust. The thing is, if my child, I say no to the video game, and then he goes to a friend's house for a play date, and then they play that violent video game, I can get angry, but that part is kind of out of my control. It's up to the other parent. So I completely agree that it's up to the parent to decide. The problem is, in the real debate, is sometimes we don't see eye to eye, and so at the end of the day, my child, yes or yes, will be exposed to that video game, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily.
I think essentially from with the whole thing about age ratings in these video games, they are a good step in measuring like who can play this game and who can't. However, it's always been proven like time and time again that, like as you said, it's very ineffective because, let's say another example is that a parent could buy this game, let's say Silent Hill, and he goes like to play it at the house, and then maybe like a child might get taken interest to it, and the parent would just let him like play the game, even though the child would be like really young, maybe too young to play that kind of game, because again, as we know, Silent Hill, not only is there like violence and blood, it also covers some like really mature themes. So again, there are like some things that are just they come out of control, and it is essentially the job of the parent to monitor what the child is playing. Let's say whenever there's a game that is 13 plus or 16 plus, there will usually be exceptions where yes, a child that is younger than 16, they could play this game, but the parent has to be there to monitor what they're watching. But usually they're just never there. They just buy the game for them to be occupied. So essentially, it's just like a root of another problem, which is the parents' responsibility of like what their child is looking at.
I think we all agree that there should be the age grades and the games should be followed, but I mean, when you have it that the kids are coming into the classrooms and they're playing these games that they should be playing for another 6 or 7, 8 years because they're not old enough, then it makes them different people. I mean, I'm not saying it makes them violent, but yes, aggressive. I've seen it a lot of times where these arguments will ensue from the games into the classroom the next day. So yes, they're becoming aggressive and they're not being focused. It's a lack of motivation, and ultimately that's what's going to keep happening from as they grow up and get older. So how would you say to combat that? Because these kids are going to take that into their adult life. So what should they do as a game developer? How can we counteract that? How can we make sure the kids aren't becoming aggressive?
Well, we could always start. So again, there is usually we can do the best we can to make it clear through like games that this is all like fake and it should never be replicated in real life. Like with the violence that is displayed. You can always like make it clear within the minigame. Like there's usually always like warnings. Let's say there's always warnings that say that people with epilepsy and photosensitivity, there's always those kinds of warnings. Like warning if you're photosensitive and because there's a lot of like flashing and things going on in the video game, it is always important to make it clear to the player that if this can like harm you, either try like avoid this game or just do it with precautions. Or in other cases as well, there's cases where you can just like turn it off. And similar to violence, there are options where you could like to turn off the amount of blood and gore that is displayed to the games. For example, in the game Warframe, there is an option of whether you can turn on or off the amount of blood and gore that is displayed within the game. So in the end, what we can do as like game developers is to not only make it clear through messages that this is all, especially like to young audiences like playing these games, to make it clear that this is not real, it should never be like replicated in real life, and yeah, just
Yeah, well, I think quite a lot of the kids understand that. It's not all of them that are this desensitized and whatever, but it's often a few ruin it for the many. And I'd like to ask you, as a college student, how would you perceive that? How many people have you seen that are the ones that actually are the violent type, and how many, like yourself, you said you enjoy games?
I mean, I don't think that violence comes from video games. Most of the time, that people will tend to be like aggressive or irritated on the game, and people that also get aggressive on real life. It's more like a background thing than a cause of the video game thing. So I don't think that video games are responsible for that kind of attitudes. I think it's most of the way they are, like the personality.
Yeah, I agree.
Adding on that, yeah, that's the whole point. A video game does not make a child aggressive. What makes a child aggressive is how their parents taught him, how they grew, if they were in a violent environment. Everything has to do with if a child grows following like the violence of a video game, but that does not make the children aggressive. It's more like something that is happening on their lives, on their family, on their surroundings.
Well, I agree with both. I think that video games don't make like the kids magically aggressive. I think if the kids have like tendencies to be aggressive, it can amplify it, but doesn't make them aggressive instantly. So even like what you say is true, age rating is not always like respect. I think it has to be respected because of that, and you have to know your kid. If your kid, like is like aggressive and get frustrated like easily, you have to make sure that it doesn't play like that type of games.
No, I completely agree with that. I completely agree with what you say. At the bottom line, it's always up to us. But I mean, we also ask for a little bit of help because we can't constantly be. I mean, message warnings are obviously really good. But at the end of the day, we can't hold you responsible. Even if we could arguably say that it's your fault because you're creating these video games, at the end of the day, you're not entirely responsible, because if you comply with the regulations, if the regulations are saying you have to write this message, you have to do this and that, and you actually do, then you're just following your job. You're doing what you were supposed to do. So at the end of the day, it really is our job. We just kind of ask for help in strict regulations. And also, I wanted to ask you a question. Since whenever you started playing video games, did your parents at one point ever say at first, before actually buying the game, for example, if it was too violent or no to the video game for whatever reason?
Well, obviously it depended on my age. For example, when I started as a kid, I used to play mostly like Nintendo stuff because they're like friendly. But when I started to grow up, they like trusted me more on the topics on the video games, and they were more open to more themes and topics. Even though if they were violent, they like knew that I could differentiate between fiction and real life. So yeah,
And how old were you?
like 14, 15 years old.
I understand, because at that point you're a teenager and maybe you've reached a certain type of maturity, and it does depend from child to child what they see, and it is subjective. But again, maybe 14, you're not mature enough, and you do perceive the reality from fiction, but that is not the only reason, or that shouldn't be the only reason as why it is okay to expose them to violence.
Well, thank you very much for your participations. I would like to ask another question, going a little bit away from, well, not away, but to another side. Why do you think people or society blames video games for violence? We know we have a lot of violent content in movies, in media, even the news. Like, our society reflects a lot of violence through the news and stuff that is happening. So why do people go at the first thing that is video games and blame them for all the violence that may be happening in children? Do you think it is like the interactivity, that the player can control the outcome of the game? Or what is it about video games that people tend to blame?
Well, I think that video games are the easiest thing to blame when we talk about violence, because it is much harder to talk about the background of the kid, if there's violence in his home or if the kid has a mental disorder. So it is way more easier to talk about the violence in games and analyzing these factors that can make like another variable of this stuff in this topic.
Yeah, I think it's as well. I imagine a lot of the people that are saying this, a lot of older people that maybe don't understand the children of today as well as that we all would here. So, I mean, it's quite an easy one to just to tick a box. Oh, you're violent, you play video games. It's quite easy to come to that conclusion. Whereas I think the people that are making these conclusions don't understand the kids of today. So I think that may be one.
I completely understand, and I understand that they differentiate fiction from reality. But sometimes it's true that I've seen video games that put in a setting that represents reality in society. For example, if they're in a desert or in a poor zone in another country and they see people that are in terrible conditions and they're killing those people in a certain country. I don't know which country, but let's take, for example, India. They're supposed to represent reality and put them in a setting. But I mean, when they see this, sometimes they can develop type of stereotypes if, again, the point is to killing them and they're in a certain country. And that is also something that can be worrying if they suddenly understand, okay, for example, if they're in a war, that they know that that's the bad side because they were asked in the video game to kill them.
And when us as like video game developers, like yes, when we create these video games, like with violence, eventually, again, obviously, it's never our intent to promote like violence or these like bad things just because just like promote them. That's a good thing when it's not the case. Our intent mainly is to use these elements, these darker elements, to help bring out a message in the story of the game. Whether it be like an action game or like a horror game, especially in horror games where they usually tackle a lot of mature themes and whenever we add violence, that is used to help push that message further, and not only that, but also help the game be more entertaining. But yeah, essentially it is usually an art form, and this applies as well for any art forms, whether it be in art, in cartoons, in movies. It is the same. Our intent is to use it as a way to express our express emotions and feelings, and yes, it is true that we also do take real life elements. Like every single video game, we always put like some part of ourselves and our own real life experiences into the game. And yes, there are cases where obviously there are a lot of stereotypes that are unfortunately put into the game, into these games, into these storylines, and yes, that can make someone perceive, let's say, like a different religion or like race differently, but in that case it is fully the developers' responsibility to like, yes, for example, use yes, it is important to create these video games like with in an art form, but it should never be used to like be hateful towards a certain like group or and even cause harm to them, because at the end of the day, in that area of the stereotypes and just bring about these like harmful ideas that can be harmful and that can put like harmful ideas into the viewer's mind. So while yes, we don't promote violence like in these video games. It should be promoted. We should also be careful as to how we present these other darker themes into these games to avoid not only promoting violence, but and I mean violence as in not just physical, but also verbally and in terms of hate.
Well, in answer to your question, well, I think that they blame the video games because it's something new, and all the time where is something new, like there is like a debate, and when it happens something like, I don't know, like a school shooting, or some tragedies like that, they say like, and the kid play Call of Duty, when all of the kids play Call of Duty, in the class. So that's my point. That is not like the video game's fault. It's like the background, and that if the kid has like a mental illness or things like that make that video game like harmful.
I really like what you mentioned about video games like being new. I mean, they already have been in the world like for years, but for bigger audience like fathers or grandparents, it's like a new media. For example, they were accustomed to movies or books. Well, why don't they complain about these graphic movies, for example, like John Wick or Logan? I think it is easier to blame what they don't know instead of what they're already accustomed to.
I totally agree with that, because violence has always been like present. Like now it's video games, but in the past years, like when my parents were young, movies or like music were so violent, but nobody took really like a big like they didn't give the importance it has like now, just because now we have like social media, we have like a more connected world, and we can like we have like a bigger world, and then they couldn't like communicate between countries, they couldn't like give their opinions like more freely, and nowadays that's different. Like I can go on internet and start saying a lot of things about video games, and another person can come and say plenty of things like in the other side. Like I can support video games, but another person can say they don't support it. And yeah, I think that that is mostly the point, and also that it's more easy to blame video games because it's kind of funny to see it, but they cannot defend themselves because they're not a person, they're like something. And when you don't have like the ability to like to defend yourself, well, you can be blamed easily. And also never mind.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but before we end, I would like to summarize some of the points we've discussed today. I think, first of all, we all agree that there are different types of violence, and there are some like violence that is inappropriate for children, some violence that is inappropriate for teenagers and for adults. And I think we also all agree that like these age rating systems, they should stay there, but they aren't really that effective, because we know people and children are playing video games that aren't in their age rating. And I think we also mentioned a very important topic, that is parent regulation. I believe we all agree that it is like the biggest part of controlling this violence that could be created by video games. The biggest responsibility lies on the parents, on taking care of their children and knowing what they are playing, what they are consuming. And lastly, I think, yes, it is kind of a problem because video games are relatively new and society aren't like totally used to it, so it is a big reason to blame. But I think with time, video games will be more normalized and maybe society will see that they are not the main reason of violence in children. The main reason comes from a background, as you mentioned. Video games can only be like a trigger or something that amplifies the violence in some wrong cases where parents do not regulate or take care of their children appropriately. So that will be the end of our discussion. I would like to thank you very much for coming and sharing your diverse points of view. And, well, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.